Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have some very important news out of the state of Georgia where President Donald Trump has officially endorsed Republican Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones in the Georgia's 2026 governor's race instead of Republican Attorney General Chris Carr that is also running. Now this is a very interesting development here because this Republican primary is going to be very competitive as right now Burt Jones and Chris Carr are the only two major Republicans running for governor at this current point in time. And with Governor Brian Kemp not currently making an endorsement in this race, the endorsement of Burt Jones by President Trump is the most notable endorsement, and what Governor Kemp decides to do is very interesting. Now, it says here that from the article from Fox 5 Atlanta that President Trump has endorsed Burt Jones. President Trump took to social media on Monday where he endorsed Jones, saying that he is highly respected and a very popular lieutenant governor. Burt Jones is running to be the next governor of the great state of Georgia. Burt Jones for governor is my complete and total endorsement. He will never let you down. Jones said, "This endorsement means so much, not just because President Trump is my friend and a true leader, but because it shows our Georgia First movement is gaining momentum. From day one, I've worked to deliver real results, fighting for election integrity, cutting taxes, securing our border, protecting our communities, and defending our Georgia values." So, Jones officially announced his candidacy last month, emphasizing his connection to President Trump and promising to eliminate Georgia's state income tax. Now, on the other side of the Republican primary, as I mentioned, Attorney General Chris Carr, who began his campaign last year, recently filed a federal lawsuit against Jones. Carr argues that Jones' leadership committee provides him with an unfair fundraising advantage and should be prohibited from raising or spending money during the primary, where Jones has already lent himself $10 million to his campaign and reported that his leadership committee has more than $14 million available. Now, on the Democratic side, things are very wide open here, with former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, State Senator Jason Estevez, State Rep Derek Jackson, and former pastor and business owner Olu Brown, and former DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurmond, all currently running. Now, this race is open due to the fact that Brian Kemp is term limited after serving 2 consecutive terms. So, as for 2026, I find this news very, very interesting, as Georgia has been one of the closest states at the presidential level in the last few election cycles, and it has been so at the Senate level, and in 2018, it was at the governor level. 2022, Brian Kemp did win re-election against Stacey Abrams by a pretty considerable margin here when you see that he won by 7.5%. But seeing it's going to be an open governor's race in 2026, I think it's more likely we're going to see a 2018 result where Kemp only won by 1.4% against Stacey Abrams. I think we're tracking to see an election more like this. And as I mentioned, Chris Carr and Burt Jones, this is going to be a very interesting Republican primary to watch. The only poll that's been taken was back in 2023, so there's really not too much to go off of here. But in this poll, Burt Jones had 18%, Chris Carr had 9%, and 73% was considered undecided at this time. As for the electability question, because I have seen this question get brought up a lot online, who would be the more electable general election candidate of Burt Jones or Chris Carr? And I don't think there's really a drastic difference. The one thing I'd say is, at least based on the past elections, the elections that involve Brian Kemp or candidates endorsed by Brian Kemp do seem to do a little bit better in the state of Georgia than the candidates endorsed by Donald Trump. And that happens as well a little bit in the Republican primary as well. Specifically, the most recent election I can think of was 2022, where President Trump endorsed David Perdue in the governor primary to try and take down Brian Kemp. Now, Brian Kemp was very unpopular this time, but Perdue ended up losing to Kemp by a lot, 73.7% to 21.8%. It essentially stopped David Perdue at any chance of having a Republican Senate or governor come back in any way. And we saw Brian Kemp win every single county in the state of Georgia. So President Trump's endorsement, it certainly has a law of pull in the state of Georgia, but when it came to against Brian Kemp, not so much. Now, a Republican running against Brian Kemp that's not Kemp himself could be a different story. I think right now Chris Carr is still a formidable candidate, but Burt Jones starts out the narrow favorite to win the primary now that President Trump has officially made his endorsement. I'm very interested to watch now this race to see what happens with Chris Carr. Does Governor Brian Kemp decide to make an endorsement in this race? Do national Republicans and Republican governors line up behind Burt Jones and endorse his race, or do some of them split and endorse Chris Carr as well? Obviously, the primary still has to go the way that it will, and we have to wait and see how that all goes, but for now, it's very interesting to see Burt Jones getting the endorsement from President Trump, who push comes to shove, if I was asked who is the more electable candidate, I would say Chris Carr is a little bit more electable in the general election than Burt Jones is, but this is a very interesting move by President Trump. On the Democratic side, all the names I mentioned are running in this race, as well as Stacey Abrams and Jeff Duncan, the 2018-2022 nominee. Abrams and Jeff Duncan, the former Republican lieutenant governor of Georgia, have expressed interest in running. No matter which Democrat ends up facing off against Burt Jones or Chris Carr, this is going to be a very competitive race after it has been very competitive in pretty much every single election for the last 10 years now. In the early hypothetical polling, that same 2023 poll showed if Stacey Abrams decided to run, she would likely start out with a lead. This race is listed as toss-up from everybody but Sabato's crystal ball that has it as lean Republican. And again, it makes a lot of sense when you look at it. Georgia in 2018 only went for Brian Kemp by 1.4%, what ended up being a very close election against Stacey Abrams. And just 2 years after, we saw President Trump win the state of Georgia at the presidential level by 5.1% against Hillary Clinton. And then in 2018, that was the first kind of wake-up call. Georgia was getting very close. Then 2020, Joe Biden ended up winning by 0.24% against Donald Trump. Now in 2024, President Trump did win the state of Georgia back, winning it by 2.2%, but that's certainly not an insurmountable margin where you can say Georgia is no longer a swing state or a battleground state. It is still certainly one of the closest states to watch for in the United States and will likely continue to be one of the closest swing states going forward for the next few years. Now, as I've talked about Georgia a few times now, the very key parts to watch for in the state of Georgia, we can look here and go more in depth, are the areas surrounding Atlanta, specifically Fulton County. We have here very big Cobb County, Douglas County, Clayton, DeKalb, and Gwinnett County. Lots of voters all packed into this densely populated area. You also have, I believe, did I mention Fayette County as well? All these people living in this area, all closely packed here. A lot of votes in this area of the state. And it does show you the pocket size of the votes. It also shows you how the state overall trended. You can see pretty much every state in the United States trended red in 2024 for Donald Trump, including the state of Georgia. But you may look very interestingly, pretty much all of Georgia trended red, except for one very key area, and that's the area surrounding Atlanta. Now, inner city Atlanta and Fulton County did actually narrowly shift towards Donald Trump by about 1.5%, as DeKalb County also went more red by 2.6%, Gwinnett 1.7%, and Polk over here, a rural county, by 3 points or so. But in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that large of a shift when you see places like Rockdale moving Democratic by 6.7, Henry by 9.2, Fayette by 3.6, then you see Douglas by 6.3, and Paulding by 4.9. Cobb also narrowly shifted a little bit more Democratic, and we see Cherokee shifting a little more Democratic as well. And I'm bringing this up because 2024 ended up being an excellent night for Republicans, where pretty much everywhere in the country shifted red, as I mentioned. 2026, based on the history of midterm elections, especially midterm elections in a president's second term, we can fully expect 2026 will be a more Democratic-friendly election environment, where Democratic voter turnout percentages usually are going to be much higher, which means if the Republicans would essentially have to replicate this entire map that President Trump got in the red areas to make up for what the Democrats are probably going to be getting in the Atlanta area, where unless the Republicans nominate a super popular candidate, Democrats are going to be very energized to get out and vote in the midterms, and then it will be a very, very close election. So President Trump's 2.2% win in 2024, given the right amount of Democratic turnout, could be an under 1 point victory for the Republicans, or maybe even a 1 to 2 point victory for the Democrats. Another very important thing to mention about Georgia is the Senate race from 2020. John Ossoff's Senate seat against David Perdue, where he won by 1.2%, is also on the ballot in 2026. And this and the governor's race are both going to be getting a lot of voters in Georgia, both Democrats and Republicans, out to vote to determine the future of their state. So it's going to be a very important state to watch for on election night. And Georgia is one of the earlier states in the country to have their polls closed. I believe they close at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the first batch of poll closings of the night. So we may start to get some votes out of Georgia in very early, come election night 2026. Now, as for the governor's race in the state of Georgia, on my 2026 governor's map, I currently have 6 states listed as a battleground or no rating, and Georgia is one of those states. I'm definitely waiting for more candidates to announce they're running or not, and some more polling data to come out. Otherwise, it's essentially just kind of blindly guessing based off the recent electoral trends in the state of Georgia and how everything's been close. Georgia seems to be more blue, or is getting bluer at the Senate level, 50-50 flip at the presidential level and a little bit more red at the governor level. That could all change come 2026. Right now, I currently have it as tilt Republican, where it's a little bit under a 1-point victory, but this is certainly going to be a very competitive state in 2026 that Democrats can certainly win, especially if the election environment ends up going their way, more so, or even exactly so how the polls are predicting right now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and I hope to see you in a future video.